Good day, everybody, and welcome to the Professors at McMurry University. I'm Paul Fabrizio.
And I'm Don Frazier, and with us today is Robert Wallace, our colleague from down at the end of the hall.
That's right, down in the sociology wing.
In the cool end of the hall.
That's right.
Wow.
We're all down there in the same wing.
Yeah, Paul's in our suite.
Yeah, I actually am privileged to know. Or
we have a sociologist hostage in our suite.
Or they're penalized or something like that. So anyway, Dr. Wallace is here, and we're going to be talking about a really interesting subject, the wrongfully convicted.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So, Dr. Wallace, let's start. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay.
Where you came from, where you got your education, and then we'll launch from there.
Okay. I grew up in the panhandle of Texas. Ended up going to Texas Tech University for an undergraduate degree there. Ended up getting interested in not necessarily sociology at the time, but gerontology, working with the elderly. Moved to Ohio, to Miami of Ohio, to work on a master's there. Finished up there, then went to Cleveland and worked for a few years at a kind of a long-term care research facility, and decided to do PhD work and ended up going to Columbia in New York and finished up there in 1990. And I moved to Abilene, Texas to teach at McMurry University.
So you came almost back home.
Yeah. I never thought I'd move back to Texas, but I did. I'd had friends that had gone to McMurry, so I kind of knew what McMurry was. And I had also this evolution of being at a large state school. It was a good education, but it wasn't a great education. And Ohio has a rich liberal arts kind of college tradition there, and started to think about the college experience. Columbia has a real strong university, but also a college wing there. And so when I came out, I knew I wanted to be not in a large research university, but in terms of in teaching intensive environment. So,
And
before you know it, 27 years later, yeah.
Yeah, here you are.
I'm curious, you said something about the elderly. Tell us about that. What was your interest in that?
I think it was, I probably hadn't had great undergraduate sociology. And so I was looking for some kind of hook, I guess, academically. I was thinking about psychology and then kept in that particular area. But I think it was the idea of being able to interact with older people and that kind of experience. Texas Tech had kind of a long-term care facility there, so I started working in that particular environment.
What did you do?
Well, that was mostly kind of activities, kind of, I guess you'd call it like social work type stuff in terms of working with the elderly.
And let them in exercises, that's it.
Water aerobics?
Well, no, it was more, I have more kind of intellectual activities, but it was to keep them busy to some extent. And that led to that there was a distinct academic area called gerontology. And I think that was pivotal that I did that, because when I got to Miami, guess where that was housed, but in the sociology department. And it was there that I realized that, I wanted more of a true academic home rather than kind of a hybrid type degree. And that really probably led me to sitting in this chair today in terms of just making that kind of accidental decision to go to Ohio. Because I nearly went to USC, but I decided to go to Ohio.
My alma mater.
Yeah.
So that'd have been a downgrade.
At that time, they probably still have the best gerontology program in the country. So, but I ended up going to Ohio, and here I am.
Yeah, let me just ask you on gerontology. When did it become its own separate field?
Probably like I finished up tech in probably about 78, and that's when it was really starting to get a lot of federal funds that literally ended up going into the academic area. So it would have been the late 70s. And one of the reasons I went to Miami is that probably the primary textbook author was there. Her name is Robert Ashley.
So you followed a name.
Yeah, in terms of that. But they had I didn't know at the time, but they had a real strong population demographic studies there, which was the attachment to sociology. And so made that particular move. Also, that's where I met my wife. Rosemary was there. So we both came out of that particular program.
Oh, cool. Now, some of my students ask me, Dr. Frazier, we're in this advising environment. I see this class called sociology. What is that?
Great question.
What is sociology exactly?
Well, in a way,
is this a softball question?
No.
It's actually not.
Let me ask, or I'll answer it like, if you'd asked me when I left tech, I would have had some idea, but
Sure.
It was pivotal to move from Texas to Ohio.
Well, I'll bet.
Yeah, and culturally speaking, because that is the first time that I ever remember sitting around. We were at a graduate school function, and somebody said, "What do you want to drink?" And I said, "Iced tea," and they all laughed. I had never, suddenly you start accents, cultural, where you come from, and so, yeah, what you drink, how you say it. So what I'm getting, Don, is that sociology is okay. I know who Don Frazier is, but I cannot really explain him unless I go, where did he come from?
Yeah.
And I'm outside there. What historical period was he born in? And literally it just keeps going like that. So to me, it's sociology is the kind of external, invisible world that we take for granted that actually influences who we are.
And it's different from psychology and how.
And just in terms of that, if I was a psychology, I probably would just stayed within that individual. And sociology, and in fact, we were reading the other day in one of the classes, the author was saying that sociology is beyond psychology. He said it's not to knock psychology, but it just says that it is a counterbalance to it, because you can get into that particular thing and only talk about Paul. Mm-hmm. But I can't really talk about Paul to really know Paul unless I start to do this kind of what I call concentric circles out there in terms of what influenced, how was he influenced, and different things like that. So it's just this larger worldview in terms of thinking about things. But, in terms of history, C. Wright Mills famously wrote in 1959, The Sociological Imagination. He says, I can't really tell anything about your biography unless I know the period, the historical period that one. So really, while we're all suite mates and into the hall, we're all pretty much oriented around social sciences, but we take probably, I would say the biggest kind of chunk of literally understanding. I can do political stuff. I can do historical stuff, but it's about trying to explain who we are as individuals.
Trying to explain who we are as individuals or as a
well, I can believe me.
I
can go. Yeah, I can go either way. I can trace Paul back to California, or Paul could also be. I know Paul went from California. He also is in Georgia. Mm-hmm. So those are these kind of rich experiences. So sociology allows me to go inward if I want to, and I teach a social psychology course where it's pretty much that kind of micro unit, but also what influences. Or I can go big, and I'm talking about the state, which the conversation we'll have today in a minute about the wrongfully convicted. You can't talk about that without talking the larger context in terms of what's going on. So we're pretty facile in terms of being able to move internally, individually, and also think structurally, socially.
I've got kids that are interested in archaeology. So they come over and say, hey, I want to study history, so I can go to archaeology. And I say, well, the pathway to archaeology is actually through anthropology, which is usually housed in sociology. So what's the connection there?
It's probably... I would say, going like the analogy about gerontology, there's probably a bigger break there with anthropology, because there are other departments where, like gerontology, would be housed in psychology or sociology. Okay. Most universities would have anthropology separate from sociology. Okay. I've seen sociology and anthropology departments, but not archaeology. Okay. And so, if you're an anthropologist, you're thinking more cultural aspects. The kind of the non-material components of a society.
To explain the stones and bones.
Yeah. And that suddenly you just went material on me, and suddenly those stones and bones are artifacts that a culture or society leave behind. And I'd use my archaeological understanding to be able to try to interpret that. But intimately connected to history, and I can see why that student would be thinking that way.
Yeah, except that in history we have to deal with written documents. Yeah. And so if you're talking about pre-literate or illiterate societies.
Yeah, it's a stretch.
Not a history project.
Yeah, it's probably we're really good on things that we do, but if I wanted to be an archaeologist, I may not want to come to McMurry.
Yeah, well, sure.
Right.
Yeah,
right. There's certain things
I can get you to an anthropology department, and that could have possibly a great archaeology. But we had a student last summer that did an archaeological dig, like in Central America.
Yeah, in Belize.
Yeah, you know who we're talking. And so that we really pushed that because we knew she needed that kind of that experience for thinking about graduate school that we couldn't offer. So
sitting out in the sun and digging holes with a cake server.
Yep.
Stones and bones.
Stones and bones. That's what the anthropology people do.
Yeah.
Okay. What does ology mean? You notice that all those things you were mentioning are ology, whereas Don's in history, no ology, and I'm in political science, no ology. So explain ology.
the study of.
So we don't study.
Well,
we study nothing. Well, but at least history goes back to one of the original Greek muses. Yeah, so we've got longevity in our discipline anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, political science gets made up in the 30s.
Yeah.
How many of you had a president who was in your field?
The only one I can think of is
Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah.
Political scientist.
I don't know why I think Ronald Reagan.
Woodrow Wilson was a political scientist? I thought he was a history professor.
He was the first head of the American Political Science Association.
Really?
Yes.
I don't want to go on record, even though I'm on the video here, but I do think Ronald Reagan was a sociology major.
Really? At Eureka College?
I think so.
In Dixon, Illinois?
I think so.
Wow.
Oh. Don't quote me, but...
The things you learn. All right. Yeah. We're now down to the end of this break. So when we come back, we'll start unpacking the wrongfully incarcerated. All right. We'll be right back.
Bear Leader Tours. Where will Bear Leader Tours take you? Everywhere. Paris. Rouge. Trieste. Battlefields. Pearl Harbor. Pacific Beaches. Louisiana. Guadalcanal. Rome. Join the adventure.
www.mcwhinney.org. And we're back. We're the professors at McMurry University, and I'm Paul Fabrizio.
I'm Don Frazier, and our special guest today is Robert Wallace from the Sociology Department here at McMurry.
Right, with a PhD from Columbia University.
From Columbia, yes.
He's got the coolest regalia.
Yes, he does, man.
Everybody else is kind of black and drab and stuff, and he comes sauntering along in that powder blue. Looked like a 1960s tuxedo. At least the color does.
We should have a picture of that. But all right, so you, in the course of your work, have migrated from an interest in gerontology, which is study of older people, to the wrongfully convicted.
Okay.
Tell us how that journey was made.
Okay, well, that journey takes you right back to, you just said Columbia. From 1984 to 1990, my wife and I were going to graduate school at Columbia. So we're right in the thick of Manhattan. April of 1989, I'm still there. Haven't been interviewed at McMurry yet because I don't really come here till the fall of 1990. There is a famous case called the Central Park 5 that happens in Central Park. Young woman is jogging at night, is attacked, sexually assaulted, brutally beaten, left for dead. And at that time, apparently that evening, there was no school the next day, so there were a lot of kids, young men, running around in Central Park up on the north side near Harlem. And they ended up carousing particular people, knocking some people off on their bikes, and 4 of them are leaving the park and get picked up by the police. They take them to the Central Park precinct and are questioning them what had happened. You know, why were they doing this mischief? About 1 o'clock that night, the precinct gets a phone call that they've just found a woman who's been brutally raped and left for dead in that particular area. Don't let the boys go. This is 89, and another thing to think about, you're in New York City, so you have just amazing newspapers like the New York Times, but you also have tabloids like the Daily News, the New York Post.
Yeah.
And so this happens, and over the night and into the morning, they say, don't let the boys go. They come in and start to literally interrogate them, separate them out. They're 14, 15 years old. Some of the parents do come down, waive the rights, and the boys start to literally just chat what they're doing. But then suddenly they go, hey, do you know what they're telling me, Paul? Don said you did it. And you got a 14-year-old boy sitting there going, what do you mean Don said that?
Yeah.
I'm not. He did it.
So the police engaged in interrogation tactics.
And 4 of the boys end up confessing to doing this, but we get into stuff in terms of confessions. Possibly they could be contaminated. Facts are introduced. If they had been doing really good detective work, they would have said, Don was saying this, Paul was saying this. They don't really know what they're talking about. And they were also, well, if you tell us what really happened, we'll let you go home. Well, 4 of them end up confessing. And what I'm getting at as a New Yorker, because I kind of consider myself still a New Yorker, that morning, you can imagine what happens in New York City. On TV, a white Wall Street banker is brutally raped in the park. 4 African American and 1 Hispanic young boys are literally arrested, and they have confessed to this particular crime. And so as a New Yorker, I'm reading that and going, oh my gosh, these kids they're definitely guilty.
Out of control.
Yeah. And they use the phrase wilding.
Wilding,
all this stuff comes up out of this particular thing.
And this, Donald Trump was one of those.
Yeah, we won't go there, but he actually puts out a large statement about bring back the death penalty in all the newspapers, just gigantic 1-page thing about bring back the death penalty. As a New Yorker, and you got to think, I never went into the park at night. We spent a lot of time in Central Park, but it was always during the day.
Sure.
And I'm wondering, why in the world would anybody go run in the park? So I'm kind of cautious about that. But then the police are really in cahoots with the media. They are leaking out information about the confessions.
It makes them look good.
Oh, yeah. And the assistant district attorney actually was doing the interrogation that was on videotape. They didn't completely videotape the confessions, only just particular parts that were fed out. So what I'm getting at is in 1989, I just assumed these young men were guilty.
Sure.
Guess what? We finish up and move to beautiful Abilene. Completely forgot about it because that fall when I think we came in, they started the trials. They're found guilty. They do 2 separate trials.
Really tidy.
Oh, real tidy.
Real
well,
tidy. A little too tidy.
Another untidiness is that this is 89. They did have some preliminary DNA testing. Guess what? The DNA testing came back and excluded all the boys.
Oh, wow.
But, Don, I have a false confession.
Yeah, I mean, what do you do with that? Yeah.
They said, we're going to trial. We'll be able to convince the jury that the DNA technology was just not up to snuff.
Yeah, that magical stuff, pay no attention.
Yeah.
And it worked.
And by the way, this is, 5 years before the O.J. Simpson trial that really brought DNA into things.
Yeah, and the link to that is also Barry Scheck, who was on the team, who becomes a pivotal figure about using DNA in terms of exonerations. Yeah. So let's say 2001, you guys, were you here, Paul?
Yes.
Okay, guess what? We launched a criminology minor at that time. So I had kind of gravitated to sociology. We realized in terms of a marketing point that criminology had major growth in terms of particular discipline. Started getting pressure from the university, so we created a minor in 2001, I think it was. Guess what happens in about 2000? These boys had also all served their time. They were out of prison. And the actual rapist, his name is Mateus Reyes, confesses that he actually did this.
Wow.
So I'm going, I thought these kids were guilty. And then I'm going, the typical pedestrian thing is, why would anybody confess to something they didn't do?
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
And I remember watching, these young kids talk, talk about, yes, no, I hit her on the head with this and da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
So they even filled in details.
Oh, yeah. Which if now when you get back and look at it, everything never fit.
Yeah,
and they should have been very cautious about that.
So in other words, the prosecutors did not do their job.
Oh, no, this is getting ready to hit because Mateus Reyes confesses. And what do? DNA, guess what?
It matches.
It's a match. And then suddenly the prosecution literally is having to now backtrack. This is Herbert Morgenthau was the district attorney through this whole process. They come clean saying that they had made a mistake. Now, the assistant district attorney has never admitted the boys are innocent. But in terms of my own intellectual journey is that we had started this minor, and literally I'm going, whoa, I thought I knew everything about the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
I assumed these boys were guilty. Come to find out, they've been excluded and they're innocent. And literally, there was enough in terms of investigative work to say that there was only one person involved rather than 5. If they had done, the police, even the investigators and the newspaper people, they had done their work, the boys would have never been near the woman where it literally happened because of where they were in the park.
Timelines and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, they call it TikTok in terms of journalism.
Yeah, TikTok.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got to stop in 20 seconds.
Okay.
What are we going to talk about in the next section?
Well,
Because this is the big cliffhanger.
No, I can take it from there. So we can be here till 6 if you guys want to. So.
All right.
It would make for a very large audio file. All right, we're going to take this break. We'll be right back. Thanks.
Welcome to State House Press, a nonprofit publisher of quality books. State House Press and the McWhinney Foundation Press are part of the Texas A&M University Press Consortium, which handles retail distribution for several small but distinguished publishers. Our entire list of offerings, with pictures, summaries, prices, and easy online ordering, is available in our section of the consortium website. State House Press is proud of its reputation for high standards of scholarship and readability. In addition to this, we at State House Press have recruited the talents of individuals such as Phil Collins on his book, The Alamo and Beyond. We release not only texana by contemporary authors, but reprints of classic accounts of Texas life and history otherwise inaccessible to the public. Our book list also incorporates the publications of the McWhinney Foundation Press, specializing in the history of the Old South and the Civil War. We strive with our titles to make history accessible to as many readers as possible. To accomplish this task, we have recruited some of America's leading historians, as well as bright new scholars. We believe firmly in narrative history, in telling a good story, and in telling it well, without losing sight of the people who've made history and the events that changed a nation.
For questions or business inquiries, please visit the Texas Book Consortium at www.tamupress.com.
When you support McWhinney History Education Group, you also support the many young workers who operate and maintain the company's digital operations. These are dedicated university students who handle many things such as filming, recording, and editing content for McWhinney, as well as cultivate the layout and structure of McWhinney's various websites, including its associated channel on YouTube. We are a nonprofit organization that exists from donations from interested persons and history enthusiasts alike. Donations enable our students to obtain a higher education, job training, and career bolstering skills. If you would like to donate, please visit us at www.mcwhinney.org and click on our About Us tab to learn more.
And we're back. You're listening to the professors here at McMurry University. My friend Paul Fabrizio is to my left. Robert Wallace is to my right. And if you enjoy this podcast or the other content on this YouTube channel or SoundCloud account, then consider heading over to our Patreon and becoming a partner. Your support helps keep this podcast going and ensures future content will continue to come from the McWhinney History Education Group. Even something as little as $1 will go a long way. Sort of. But with the larger donations you give, the better the gifts or rewards will be for you. So do yourself a favor and support us.
And thank you.
And thank you.
All right. We're talking with Dr. Robert Wallace, professor of sociology, and we're talking about the wrongfully convicted. And so you're bringing up the Central Park Five.
Okay.
And you left us hanging. This guy confessed.
Okay.
And the 5 who were convicted and served their time, they were released.
They get released right after that, so their sentences are vacated.
Okay.
And it doesn't. That's about 2002, and it wasn't until 2014 that the city actually compensated them. I think it's like a $40 million type of a settlement for what had happened to them.
Wow.
So, which is a whole other issue, but yeah.
Did the guy who got who was
he was already in prison? Yeah,
he was already in prison.
Yeah.
Has he ever been charged with the crime?
Oh yes, yeah. But the tragic thing is that he was at the time known as the Upper East Side rapist, which is where we are in Central Park on the Upper East Side. The police saw him coming out of the Central Park on probably on Park Avenue on the east side with the woman's Walkman.
I was about to say, carrying her gear.
Yeah. And but they hadn't put it together. He also the night before had attempted to rape a woman in the park. She had said, "There's somebody who tried to rape me, had stitches in his chin." One of the central precinct officers goes to around the hospitals, identifies Mateus Reyes, but there's never any convergence in terms of what happens. What happens in terms of the wrongfully convicted is you tend to get tunnel vision or confirmation bias. As soon as they got confessions from one of the boys, probably 2 o'clock in the morning, they just took off.
Just quit working the problem.
Yeah, and whatever new information came in, they didn't want to know it. They had their confessions. DNA exonerates them, doesn't matter. We've got confessions, and that's what happens. So you get that kind of tradition. Now back here, I said we started a criminology minor. Traditional kind of teaching the minor at that time, different courses are set up. We set up a 18-hour thing. And so I'm in my mind going, whoa, I need to rethink this whole criminal justice system. Maybe sometimes we do get it wrong. So I'm playing with that in my head, but still kind of teaching traditional criminology. About 2005, The Innocent Man is written by John Grisham.
Oh, yeah, the book, yeah.
And I know him as a fiction writer, but this was his first nonfiction.
Right.
And the criminology allowed me to kind of explore, and we had a kind of a final course called Issues in Criminology. And I would kind of teach it particular things, but that's May term. It was a May term. I used the John Grisham book. So I was evolving from, something that I thought people were guilty weren't. And by the time I get to about 2005, 2006, and get into the Grisham book, it takes us into Oklahoma, 2 guys in Oklahoma. And in terms of that particular aspect. So I'm kind of evolving to where, this is a great way to teach criminology. Because it's about what happens when the system gets it wrong. And suddenly, I first kind of explore with the Grisham book, and other things are starting to come out at that particular time. Guess what? I'm in the state that has the most exonerations anywhere in the country. I had some numbers here. Literally this year, there were 2,377 identified innocent individuals. Now, that's over since 1989. That represents nearly 21,000 years of false imprisonment. So we have that kind of problem. And Texas leads the country with 350 wrongful convictions. And so I'm in a state that is real. The good thing about teaching this also that it's real case focused.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can go, we've done things where we've just focused on, because I'm interested maybe on, false confessions. Well, guess what? Texas leads the country in the exonerations dealing with false confessions. And so you could do a whole case study about the number of false confessions literally in Texas. So Texas is really kind of an interesting thing.
If I can interrupt for just a second. Texas leads the country in this. Is that because Texas is busy identifying it? Is that because Texas has a horrible prosecution system?
Cooking the books a little bit.
Because what I'm wondering is California is a bigger state. California has had a high crime rate in the past. Mm-hmm. How does California compare? Are they doing the kind of investigative work to check this?
I just happen to have some statistics on
Please. And I got to tell you, I have a brother who's a prosecutor out in California. So
I love it when the sociologist, the social scientist.
But Texas is 354, Illinois 277, New York 271, and then the next state is California at 201.
Wow.
So it is a combination of some sense of the punitive nature of Texas in terms of that particular aspect. There are, so I think we're kind of unique. Now, in terms of like Texas, we've been very reform-oriented, which is also another good way to teach this type of stuff in Texas. But Illinois also, they had just a rash of stuff. But there's a major racial component to this because 65% of the wrongful convicted are African American. So you have that kind of problem in terms of things. Guess which city in Texas leads it but Dallas, who takes us to Wade. the district attorney in Dallas, which would have all white juries with black defendants and stuff like that. So there are amazing problems. So Dallas is literally leading the country in terms of wrongful convictions, and that has been, they're probably pretty good to talk about because there's a microcosm of a district attorney that got very active in terms of looking at this, and the new rise of forensic technology of DNA. And they've been able to, rape kits were kept. And so they've been able to go back and just start testing, and it just snowballed from there.
Is there a time period where they seem to be concentrated?
That's an excellent question.
Oh, thank you.
That's why you asked it.
In fact, that's, one of the things that the book that I use right now in the class is written in 2010. And Brandon Garrett uses the first 250 people that had been exonerated from DNA. Mm-hmm. All of those cases tended to be about like the Central Park Five that happened in the 90s, in the 80s, with some technology of DNA, but not enough to really be conclusive. And they got found guilty, sitting in prison, and then suddenly there's this floodgates of letters being written about innocence. And I think literally like the Innocence Project that does the DNA stuff, they get like 500 letters a week about people saying, I'm wrongfully convicted. But it's costly to do the DNA analysis. And so that kind of stuff, that evolution. So I would say that, kind of in a joking way, I may be out of a job teaching wrongfully convicted in about 15 years because of rather than using DNA as the last thing, it becomes the first step in terms of exclusion. So that's evolving, but there's still, hundreds of people that were caught in that particular system that are possibly still there. We had a person just come out in Louisiana that had been on death row for 30 years and came out, and I think that's the longest time on death row that the innocence had happened. So
has any state executed someone who was innocent?
Where do you live?
And give us a time period because we can go way back on that one.
The great state of Texas in the last 40 years.
Yeah,
I mean, the death penalty was brought back.
Yeah, I'm afraid that
in the
that
70s. I
could probably say with pretty strong confidence that there have been two people that I think that had been on death row that have been executed.
That are innocent.
Oh, that I think were innocent. Yeah, and that had to do with faulty work in terms of fire. In terms of, and there's a whole.
One of them was here in Texas, or were they both here?
Oh no, yeah, they're both in Texas, and they're in terms of literally, how we interpreted maybe what fire would have had, the arson aspect, and Cameron Todd Willingham is the case I'm talking about. They had been found guilty of killing both his daughters, but when the evolving of the forensic of how you look at arson. What they saw was burn patterns were actually just where the windows were. And it literally had come down into that, and actually the prosecutor identified it was like a pentagram. He must have been satanic. Well, that was literally the position of the windows of where the window came in that affected the burn pattern. So and I feel real confident that he was innocent, but we continue to execute. And there's a Hispanic man down in Corpus Christi he was, same name as the actual perpetrator, but he was found on death row and we executed him. So there are two cases that have gotten an amazing amount of exposure.
Have either of those ever been exonerated?
No.
After the fact?
Posthumously?
No. But there's been enough of people that are interested in wrongfully convicted to have a pretty strong record in terms of that they were definitely innocent. Or I would say definitely innocent.
Wow. So wrongfully dead is...
it's
I mean, what would the state do if they killed the wrong person?
We need to answer that question after this break. We'll be right back.
We only have 8 minutes. Okay.
History has become one of the most fought-over battlegrounds in terms of shifting people's views and opinions about their country. In response to this, we have decided to launch a website called Go To History that will become your home for clear-eyed history content. Our objective is to put history out there, free of agendas, and allow you, the viewers, to decide what you believe and decide how to interpret this information. With experienced professors such as Dr. Don Frazier and Dr. Stephen Hardin teaching courses and creating agenda-free content for students and just plain history enthusiasts, the content of Go To History is vastly informative and unbiased.
History people, it's Phil Collins here. I am just giving a shout out to a couple of guys that you're going to be hearing from. And they're good friends of mine, but they're also incredibly knowledgeable historians. Dr. Donald Frazier and Dr. Stephen Hardy. Both great friends of mine, both helped me out with my book on the Alamo. And two guys, if you don't know much about history, these are the first two guys you should go to. Okay, what they don't know isn't worth knowing. Don Frazier, Steve Hardy, I hope you enjoy their presentations.
My name is Evan Williams, a history major at McMurry University, and I love the layout of the GoTo website. I mean, it is singularly built from the ground up with user convenience in mind. Every study available is within a single Courses tab, with each lesson having a single page for each of its individual videos, text, visuals, and quizzes, all at easy grasp. This is most definitely history made simple.
Please log on to www.gotohistory.com.
And we're back. I'm Paul Fabrizio.
I'm Don Frazier, and this is our guest, Robert Wallace.
Yes, indeed. And we're talking about the wrongfully convicted, and we're talking about the fact that you believe from your research that you're confident that the state of Texas has executed two innocent people.
At least two.
And then that leads to the next question. Have innocent people died in prison? For other reasons,
or just been in prison so long they died, and were there unlawfully.
You remember where I went to undergraduate?
Texas Tech.
Texas Tech. So guess what? I can take you to Lubbock. Famous case there, probably about 1984. Man called Timothy Cole, Fort Worth kid, goes to Texas Tech, going to be a computer science major, and there is a Texas Tech rapist that's going around, African American man. Pretty much raping white women. And it happens, if you've ever been up there, like St. John United Methodist Church in that parking lot, ladies park there, man gets in her car, drives her out into the country, rapes her, leaves her there, and then comes back. She finally gets back into town, and they do a composite sketch of the individual, and he is, she said, a chain smoker, and had a knife. And so they have fingerprints from the car, which somehow never make it. They lose the fingerprints. They do a sting operation around Texas Tech, and Timothy Cole, I think, is like at a pizza parlor and actually chats with the female police officer undercover. And she goes, whoa, he does look like the composite sketch. And it just snowballs from there. The woman that was the victim actually she IDs him, which is a whole other. We could do that for the next.
Next time
it's literally 75% of the wrongful convictions involve eyewitness misidentification.
You say that again. Eyewitness misidentification.
And this is a victim of rape, and she misidentifies this individual. She goes on trial. Yes, that man right over there is the man who raped me. So that's very powerful evidence that goes into trials. And Timothy Cole is found guilty, got an amazing family out of the Fort Worth area. Actually, one of my students was his nephew, his brother, some connection. And, so he's found guilty. Guess what happens? Guess what? This segues right back to the Central Park Five. The actual rapist is in prison, confesses, writes a letter to the district attorney in Lubbock that I did this. There's a man in prison now that shouldn't be there. What do you think the district attorney does with that information? Maybe that, or puts it on the shelf.
Yeah.
2 years later, the rapist, his name is Johnson, writes Timothy Cole, thinking surely he's been out of prison for this. Writes the letter. Guess who gets the letter? But Timothy Cole's mother. Timothy Cole had died in prison about 3 years earlier from an asthmatic attack. So they were going for a chain-smoking individual and ended up arresting, convicting, and incarcerating a man who is asthmatic. Tragic, dies. The mother, you can imagine the turmoil in terms of what happens with the family. contacts the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, and it just all blows up.
Mhm.
And now today, if you get to go to Lubbock, you can go on like University on 19th Street. They have actually a large statue of Timothy Cole there. But what I want to get at, the point is that literally out of that, Texas becomes not on the capital punishment side, but in terms of the wrongfully convicted dying in prison side, decide they need to do some reforming. And they create the Timothy Cole Act, which is literally compensation for every year you've been wrongfully convicted. And we pay $80,000 for each year that you've been wrongfully convicted. There's counseling, educational stipends, and things like that. And Texas has led the country in exonerations, but also in terms of kind of that type of reform. So, but that's just very tragic case in terms of that.
And fairly close to home.
Yeah, which is great for teaching, because there are these cases that I could literally take just about every county. I've got 25 students in class, and I can identify the counties, and you could literally go, okay, sorry, you got that county, and so that's a great thing in terms of teaching, because it's very case focused. You can stay local in terms of your own state or whatnot. It's great for honors theses. We've had several students have written honors theses that they'll take a particular case. I've had students write about gender, because we haven't even talked about women. It's a very small percentage. We haven't even talked about, what if you don't have DNA evidence? And there's a whole group called the Centurion Ministries that deal with non-DNA cases. And it takes literally over $300,000 to literally work for somebody's innocence. Mm-hmm. Guess what? One of the famous cases is out of Dallas. Her name is Joyce Ann Brown. And literally, if the police had done the work that they should have been doing on the investigative side, she would have never been found guilty. And so you got DNA stuff that's literally going on, but you also other people literally working on the non-DNA side. So it's an amazing, in a way you talk about, in terms of just the teaching and thinking about it, they talk about just this innocence revolution, because it's changed how we do particular things. I mentioned the eyewitness stuff. It affects how you do that. Mm. How do you do lineups? How do you do photo things? What would have been acceptable 20 years ago, where you'd go, I'd show you a picture, and Paul, you'd go, I think that's who it is. And as a police officer, I go, thank you. That's our number one suspect. Yeah. And what did I do? But I just confirm. And you go, yes.
Confirmation bias is what you called it.
Yeah. And
so what you're doing is you're finding a way to examine the criminal justice system, and a way for the students to understand it by going and looking at some of the mistakes.
Yeah. And it's that. And it doesn't just stop there, because then always it's about, what do we do to reform this? How do we change it? And so it's a really, yes, we got it wrong. Let's don't do it again. And so I can take some of our students who become police officers, and you can't take this kind of information or whatnot without going, you just said confirmation bias, without going, oh my word, I need to be much more cautious about this. And I need to be able to be as open as possible about other suspects, because that's another amazing honors thesis thing, is that what happens to the person that they didn't arrest. Yeah. And there's so many cases when there are other murders, other crimes that are being done because the police locked in on a particular person.
When I was in college, I actually had a ringside seat to a capital murder case in which two people were accused and arrested for going out at night and shooting some people on a lover's lane, and then one rolled on the other, and the other couldn't dodge it. The one guy got 40 years, the other guy got the gurney ride. Yeah. And so I've always, I knew this guy, I went to college with him. He's somebody I'd spent time with. And so I always wondered, was he actually the trigger man, or was the other guy the trigger man? Pretty sure they were both there, but man, we could talk about this stuff.
I know. Yeah. I mean, we were talking about police procedures in my state government class today. Yeah. And so that was an education too. So you've got 10 seconds to give a final plea for students to come and.
Oh, well, it is amazing. And in terms of my own evolution, is that it's, it is about, in a very sociological way, there are problems out there. What can we do to correct it? And it dovetails beautifully with that. And then you got a case focus, and it's around Texas. It's hard to beat.
Great.
Wow.
Class dismissed.
All right.